my name is Jacqueline Cortez Wang. I'm the White House Initiative on Educational Excellence for Hispanics Deputy Director. Welcome to the Bright Spot in Hispanic Education Google Hangout, aimed at highlighting the good work that organizations are doing across the nation to reduce the achievement gap for Hispanics. As you may recall, as part of our 25th anniversary, our initiative made a national call for bright spots in Hispanic education and announced over 230 organizations, programs, and initiatives that are working to close the achievement gap for Hispanics. To elevate the work, including promising practices of these bright spots, and learn from their experience, our initiative has hosted a series of Google Hangouts on educational topics of interest over the last few months. Today's interactive session will provide an opportunity to hear from some of our bright spots, moving the needle on progress forward in the area of early learning. As a mother of a 2-year-old, this topic is very near and dear to my heart, so I'm really excited to hear what these bright spots are here to share. I'm joined here by my colleague Libby Doggett, Deputy Assistant Secretary in the Office of Early Learning at the U.S. Department of Education, who will serve as our subject matter expert. We're also joined by 9 Bright Spot organizations throughout the country who lead the effort in providing the Hispanic community with access to quality early learning programs, including ACE, a community for education, Parent-Child Home Program, Committee for Hispanic Children and Families, Los Angeles Universal Preschool, Notre Dame ACE Academy, Port Salerno Talks Early Learning Initiative, the Parent-Child Home Program, and Vision to Learn. We'll invite our bright spots to tell us a little about their organization and what they're doing to reduce the achievement gap for Hispanics. First, ACE, a community for education from the University of Texas in Texas.
Hi there. At ACE, a Community for Education, we work to ensure that all children get off to a strong start in reading and become proficient readers by 3rd grade, setting them on a path to success in school and in life. And we have a huge need for this work in Central Texas. We have a fastest growing 0 to 5-year-old population. Large percentage are Hispanic and likely to be living in poverty. A lot of our kids end up, when they start school, already behind. And so we meet this need by placing about 100 full-time AmeriCorps members into low-income schools in Central Texas, where they work full-time with kindergarten, 1st, and 2nd graders to close that achievement gap. We're a fully bilingual program. 75% of our children are Hispanic, and about half of them we are serving in Spanish as well as in English. And we're very honored to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Ace. Next, the Parent-Child Home Program from New York.
Hi. We are delighted to be here today and delighted to be a bright spot. The Parent-Child Home Program's focus is on the achievement gap by getting rid of the preparation gap, and we do that work through intensive home visiting with families for the 2 years before their children enter a 4-year-old pre-K or Head Start program. The families receive 92 home visits over a 2-year period. At each of those home visits, a home visitor models for the parent and child together reading, play, and conversation activities that build language, literacy, numeracy, and social emotional skills. We serve families in their native language with a home visitor who speaks their language and shares a cultural background with them. Nationally, 60% of the families we work with are English language learners, and a vast majority of those are Spanish speakers. We are delighted to be doing this work and to be joining with you to talk about how we can bridge the achievement gap for Latinos in this country.
Thank you so much. Next, I'd like to introduce Port Salerno Talks Early Language Initiative from Florida.
Hi, the Port Salerno Talks team is honored to be part of the National Dialogue on Early Learning and Hispanic Education. Port Salerno Talks is a joint school community family engagement initiative in Martin County, Florida. PST was formed as a response to the significantly low levels of school readiness as demonstrated by incoming kindergarten students. The program seeks to prevent the achievement gap from forming by partnering with families in the Martin County School District to provide them with early language interventions. The goal of the intervention is twofold: to educate parents regarding the critical nature of early language acquisition and to give parents the tools and strategies necessary to craft meaningful and supportive interactions with their children in their home language beginning at birth. Our first session served 18 families, which collectively had a total of 58 children, all of whom were Hispanic and non-native English speakers. First languages of families included Spanish, Mam, Canjabal, Quiche, and Papti. In our current session, we're partnering with 25 families with a collective 77 children. We look forward to sharing what we've learned as an initiative and from learning from our fellow Bright Spots.
Thank you so much. Next, I'd like to introduce Vision to Learn from California.
Buenos dias, buenas tardes, good afternoon, and good morning to some of you. We're delighted to be here, part of this global handout, Google Hangout. Vision to Learn provides free eye exams and free eye glasses to students in low-income communities to improve their ability to succeed in school and in life. Our trained optometrists and opticians travel directly to school sites, community events, and health fairs in a mobile vision clinic and provide exams to students on site. We serve Title I students throughout California, Delaware, Hawaii, Iowa, and most recently Baltimore. This year we plan to pilot programs in several additional states. Our goal is not just that students will get glasses, but they'll love their glasses. Each student picks their own high-quality frames from a wide variety of popular colors and styles. We distribute all glasses at parties, at schools, to show kids that it's cool to receive glasses. We partner with sports teams like the Los Angeles Dodgers, LA Clippers, the Golden State Warriors, and highlight athletes who wear glasses. Since 2002, we have provided over 53,000 exams and over 40,000 pairs of glasses.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. I'm obviously a very big fan of the glasses. Next, I'd like to introduce Notre Dame ACE Academy from Indiana.
G'day, my name's Kieran Roach. I'm the principal here at St. John the Evangelist. We're in Tucson, Arizona. To understand ACE, especially with two ACEs at this program, our ACE stands for the Alliance for Catholic Education. And put simply, ACE is the University of Notre Dame's response to the challenges that the American education system is facing and work to make Catholic schools excellent and accessible to every child. There's a number of programs and services within ACE as a teacher formation program and leadership program. Also, ACE informs public policy, and also ACE creates a new innovative school models, and that's where we come in as a Notre Dame ACE Academy. It's a comprehensive partnership with the University of Notre Dame, and we are here in the first of 3 that started in Tucson, Arizona. Currently there is 8 schools, and next year there'll be a total of 14 schools into the network. ACE has over 22 years of experience with working with schools, as well as served over 180,000 students. The staff members behind me here, we've been working on 6 years, and our kindergarten kids, we are 80% free and reduced lunch, and for the past 6 years they've been on the top 10% in reading and the top 20% in mathematics on our ITDS test scores. So we're super excited to be part of this, and as the ladies behind here, they're doing amazing things in the rooms.
Great, thank you so much. Next, Los Angeles Universal Preschool from California.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Celia Ayala, and I'm privileged to be part of a Bright Spot and recognized for the work that we do for the youngest children, 0 to 5. LA has been around since 2004. We were established by First 5 LA through tobacco tax, and primarily to provide quality preschool programs for 4-year-olds. Since then, through early challenge grants and others, we have focused on the 0 to 5 population. But today, we are privileged and proud to say that we are over 115,000 children to be kinder ready and to be successful in school and in life. Los Angeles Universal Preschool, LAF, better known as LAF because we do more than preschool. We are about early and quality early care and education. We focus on the child, but a lot of the work that we do is through the workforce. So we have a workforce development consortia, and we also focus on working with parents. The first and primary teachers of the children are the parents. So family engagement and family strengthening resources are some of the work that we do. We're transitioning, instead of funding programs for spaces to maintain our effort on improving quality for early care and education. And we're going to be doing that through a quality rating and improvement system. But a big part of moving our pivot, moving our organization forward is through our public policy agenda. So it's great to be recognized as a bright spot and happy to join all of the 200 plus that were recognized.
Thank you so much. And now for the Committee for Hispanic Children and Families.
Hi. So for 34 years, CHCF has combined education and advocacy to improve opportunities and outcomes for families and children in New York City, specifically Latino families. In the Early Care and Education Institute, we improve early learning outcomes by focusing on the professionalization of the family child care sector. We do this by providing evidence-based Spanish language trainings, by meeting providers where they are. We also we have a hotline where we provide quality, in-depth Spanish language and culturally sensitive resources for parents seeking childcare. We're really excited to be here today. Thank you.
Thank you, CHCF. So now I'd like to go ahead and start our question and answer portion of this Google Hangout. This first question goes to ACE, a Community for Education. How does ACE address the needs of English language learners to ensure that they get off to a strong start in school?
So here in Central Texas, our partner school districts have a very strong dual language emphasis, and really are hoping that children who come to our schools as native Spanish speakers will become biliterate and as well as bilingual. And because we are a fully bilingual program, we can address those foundational skills in reading in both languages. And we know that a child's literacy skills, if they're strong in their first language, that will support their learning in their second language. And one of our bilingual tutors, Maddie, is here, and she has a perfect example she'll share quickly.
Hi, I had one student who is in first grade, and he came in only really speaking and reading in Spanish. And he's in a mixed language classroom, so he gets instruction in both Spanish and English. And making him, he was behind grade level, and now at the end of the year, he's on track to be on grade level for the year. And I've also just seen him really grow in confidence with his skills in Spanish reading, which ultimately has transferred to confidence in reading in English in his second language, and just verbal skills, writing skills, all around improvement in his work.
I want to ask you a question that's not on your list. I hope you're okay with that. So I'm always delighted to talk to people from Austin since that's my hometown. I'm really interested in seeing more Hispanic families and families that don't speak English feel really comfortable teaching their kids their own language. Kids are going to learn English because they're here and it surrounds them, but we really want them to be able to learn two languages. And it's actually, these kids come in and they have a gift, they have an advantage, and we haven't treated it that way. And we have not told parents, talk to your kids in your home language where you feel comfortable. Are you seeing more families feeling comfortable doing that, and are we giving those messages out?
You know, I do think that we partner with a lot of organizations like some of the bright spots here that are here in Central Texas that work with the families before school, and I think that message is very clear. And those organizations, while they're serving largely Hispanic populations, we have a growing, strong Vietnamese, large population, growing refugee population, and I think that message is clear. I have seen a real shift. I've been doing this work for 21 years, and I've seen a real shift in the school districts embracing. I think we used to get kids out of Spanish as quickly as we could. In 7th grade, we'd say, hey, you ought to take Spanish. And so I think we're really embracing that the children come in with a skill set that we can nurture and develop, as well as obviously they need strong skills in English as well. So.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you, Ace. This next question is for Notre Dame Ace Academy. What strategies do you use to actively engage and involve parents in your students' ongoing academic formation, especially in the primary grades?
Well, this year we adopted the APTT, which stands for the Academic Parent Teacher Training, and what that does is a framework that effectively builds capacity in order to support family-teacher engagement. So it kind of takes the place of your traditional parent-teacher conference, and it's built with a more collaborative and developmental process. It's very intentional, strategically done, and systematically done to support parents and other families members to do activities with the child on targeted areas and skills at home that they're learning in the classroom. It's very effective in where it builds that community relationship overall.
That's actually one of the most effective family engagement techniques I've seen lately, and I'm so glad you're doing it. They're certainly doing it here in the Washington, D.C. area, and I think it's one of the reasons the schools have improved so rapidly. So thank you all for that. I'd also like to ask, how do your families how much do they need to pay for the preschool program?
That's a great question. So we actually currently meet with each family individually and work out according to need, because we're a school choice state, Arizona, so we know that if we can work with them in early childhood with the preschool program, that in kindergarten they have scholarships that will follow them too. And also further than that, we actually even have removed barriers to enrollment. So I remember my first year as principal, I had a parent come in who couldn't pay our $50 registration fee, and she walked away from a $5,000 scholarship. So we've removed all registration fees, we've removed all of the paperwork associated with enrolling a child into a school, as long as we have your commitment and your desire to want to be in a Catholic school. We feel it's our obligation to provide the best way to get you in and as easy as possible.
Thank you.
Thank you. This next question is for the Parent-Child Home Program. Why does your home visiting model work, and how is it different from other early childhood education programs?
Thank you. That's a great question. So it's different from other early childhood programs because we reach families when their children are turning 2 and sometimes before, because we go into the homes of families twice a week over a 2-year period, so that we're able to impact the home environment. And as we all know, through 12th grade, the home environment is where children spend the most time. And so that impact on home environment and giving parents the knowledge, skills, and materials that they need to get their kids ready for school, and then to stay their children's academic advocates as their children move through school is so critical. And this ties back into Libby's question to Ace earlier, which is it's really important to get into homes with messages like the value of speaking to your children in your native language and building strong native language skills before children enter school. And if we don't reach parents early with those messages, they don't hear that, and they're worried about interfering with their children learning English. So we are in there early, intensively, with the home visitor who speaks the family's native language, who's highlighting for parents the gifts they're giving their children by giving them strong native language skills. They will learn English when they get to school, and they will become exactly the bilingual citizens that we all want moving forward.
Great. Sarah, it's good to see you and your team, and congratulations on being a bright spot. I know you all are really collecting a lot of data. That's one of the wonderful things about home visiting, is we have such good data to show. So what data do you have around impacts on Latino families? Oh, so we seem to have lost them, so I'm going to turn it over to Jacqueline, and she has a question for Port Salerno.
So how can we step out of silos in order to better collaborate and to prevent the achievement gap?
Hi, thank you. So through the work of Port Salerno Talks, we've created a structure for early collaboration between parents, educators, our community, in order to solve the word gap problem and ultimately close the achievement gap. But the most important component of this collaboration is parents. We're even shifting our language around how we speak about parents. We're not empowering them. Parents have the power already. All we're doing is supporting parents in using their home language to build their child's brain. But while families are the key, we also need a community-wide paradigm shift. No single organization or group owns this work alone. The entire community has a hand in ensuring that our children are ready for success in school and life. We all play a role in partnering with parents to provide them with the tools and strategies necessary to establish that really rich home language environment. It's just that each of our roles take on a slightly different form. If we truly seek to move the needle, we need hospitals, pediatricians, social service organizations, libraries, and schools working together. Stepping out of silos to close the word gap has multiple benefits. Not only does it allow different organizations to capitalize on their resources to approach the problem, but it also allows parents and families multiple points of entry into services. If the entire community is working collaboratively to close the gap, then we ensure that parents are hearing the same powerful message through a variety of trusted messengers. The job of closing the gap belongs to all of us. The community has to own this work, and parents have to own this work, and they have a hand in crafting that. We have an opportunity to really redefine how and when we collaborate to engage families in early learning.
That's fantastic. Well, we all know that the children are born learning, but people that aren't on this Google Hangout may not know that. How are you talking to the rest of the community, and actually how do you talk to parents who don't really understand that this brand new baby really is a brain just waiting to be stimulated? How early do you tell them learning starts?
Well, we tell them it starts at birth. Actually, it really starts before birth. We know that the ear is formed at the 20th week of gestation, so babies are born already hearing. So to delve into that early language development, we know that that's the foundation for literacy, and that's the thing that we are stressing with our community, that this early foundation is really the key to literacy, because we know that there are many programs that are going on in our country about reading, but we know that language is that foundation. Anything else? Let's see.
Thank you.
So my next question is going to Vision to Learn. How large is the unmet need for glasses among Hispanic youth, and how does that impact our students?
Hi, everyone. Sure. Well, we estimate that there are about 2 million students nationwide that need glasses to actually be able to read the board, read a book, complete their math homework. We also know that 80% of early learning is visual, yet 95% of incoming first graders who need glasses don't actually have them, and this is especially prevalent in Latino low-income communities. And students with uncorrected vision problems often avoid reading, they suffer headaches, they have trouble focusing in the classroom, and eventually all of this leads to larger symptoms, and so students won't have the proficiency in reading and learning by the time they reach 3rd grade, which can eventually lead to just being completely disengaged and eventually dropping out. So yeah, it's incredibly important.
Great. Well, I think you all made a compelling case for us. What are some of the barriers to access for kids getting glasses, and how are you addressing those?
So there's a lot of reasons why a student, even if they've been recommended through a vision screening to go see an optometrist and get glasses, might not connect the dots and actually get that exam and glasses. There are transportation hurdles. There might be a lack of available providers in the area, confusion about payment or how much it might cost, and even just awareness about the importance of getting that exam. So Vision to Learn's program model uses mobile clinics. We take clinics staffed with a licensed optometrist and optician directly to school sites, and we serve the whole school at once. So every child who has failed a vision screening, an eye chart if you will come out to the clinic. They'll be seen by the optometrist and given a full eye exam. And then if they are prescribed glasses, they choose right there on the clinic from a variety of different sizes and colors of frames. We come back a couple weeks later and provide all the glasses to the school at once in a glasses party to get the kids excited about wearing them and make sure that any social stigma is eliminated. And through this process, it makes it easy for schools and parents and students to get the glasses they need.
Okay, I want you to look at these cool glasses on John.
I love them. What kind of frames are those? We should start offering them.
They're very cheap, I can tell you that.
Do you have something like that? You know, some kids might want glasses even if they don't need them.
Oh, sure. Well, sometimes we give kids sunglasses if they're really desperate to get glasses and they don't need them. But yeah, the social stigma that many of us had as kids is kind of gone. When kids come to our program, they come running to the cafeteria to get their glasses. They're very excited.
I have a few nephews who say that they want glasses, but they don't need them, and they're disappointed. So times have definitely changed since I was a kid. So the next question is going to LAUP in California. Given that the population LAUP serves is more than 60% Latino, how do you address the linguistic and cultural needs of this community?
So we work with our providers, which are about 600 of them, and they come from nonprofit, public, private, and a lot of it has to do with teacher training institutes in terms of making sure that the teachers have the tools, the skills, and the materials to be able to welcome the children and the families. So part of it is where they are in the community and to ensure that we value the families linguistically and culturally, but also making sure that the teachers know how second language or dual language learners, as Libby alluded to, because so many of them already come with 2 languages, that we value the language. We also make sure that we work with other communities because although 68% are Latino, we have 144 languages and we have some very significant populations, in particular Korean, Armenian, and obviously the Chinese communities. So we work with how they can value the home language, but also we're working with the parents with take time talk. In terms of going back to a question that was raised, the parents can teach so much of the vocabulary that when the children come with a separate or different home language, that we have staff in each of the communities that can address and welcome them, but with the appropriate support and materials that they need in every part of our community in the greater Los Angeles County area.
Celia, thank you so much for all you have done and for what you all are doing. It's pretty exciting to have you be a bright spot. How do you engage the parents of Latino children who speak Spanish but have very low literacy skills?
So a lot of it is working with our Take Time Talk is just talking to our children, singing to our children. We know that in the Latino cultures there's a lot of storytelling, there's a lot of singing, and we talk about, without research language, talk about the importance of just touching, singing, and talking to their children. And that they may not necessarily be able to read themselves, but being able to speak to their children and having their children do book walks and become comfortable with that transition from home to school, like they're going to become from preschool to kindergarten. So it's about valuing the language of the home without having to be literate in terms of reading, that they have a lot to offer their children through their stories and through their adivinanzas and canciones, that they can work with their children from whatever level of literacy that they have. So it's making them feel comfortable, and we're partnering obviously with the media. First Five California has a terrific campaign of Sing, Talk, and Read to Your Child, just language alone, to eliminate or eradicate the 30 million word gap by the time our children get to be 3 years old.
Let me ask one quick follow-up. If you have a family that speaks a language other than Spanish, you know, and you don't have a staff person, what do you do in that case?
We reach out to community-based organizations. So we have what we call Best Start LA, that's also in partnership with First Five LA. And we reach out to agencies in the community because even in Spanish, there's dialects. Right. If they come from south part of Mexico or Central America. But in the Korean community or in the Asian community, we work with volunteers and our parents volunteer at the schools to ensure that the children are not being left behind because the teacher, the primary teacher, does not speak their language. So it's being able to, as I think it was the second organization, it truly becomes a community approach to teaching and learning, that we use the resources within communities to ensure that we do not leave any child behind.
Great, thank you.
This next question is for the Committee for Hispanic Children and Families. How does CHCF support school readiness in the early education sphere?
Sure. So we promote school readiness and early education predominantly by working to professionalize and support the family child care sector in every way that we can. And the reason for this is that, you know, in family child care homes that are quality programs that implement evidence-based curriculum, that are aware of the regulations and feel well supported and prepared to spend the 10 hours of each day that these providers do work with children. What we really are doing is enabling those providers not only to feel empowered, but also we're affecting learning contexts for children. And one way we do that is through our trainings, which Jen can maybe tell us a little bit more about.
Sure. And so similar to what Leah said, a lot of the trainings that we provide are in the home language of our child care providers. And I think what a great part about our trainings is that, we make sure that the content that we provide is culturally sensitive. The child care providers are also able to connect with one another and form networks, kind of informal support networks, and share their day-to-day experiences and really build on, the strengths that they have culturally and as caregivers.
Great. I have a kind of a follow-up on that. And how are you promoting the professionalization of the family child care sector? We have a new report, or it's about a year old now, but we're still excited about it, that actually is calling for the lead teacher in every early childhood classroom, no matter where, home or center, to have a BA degree in training in early childhood. We know that's going to take a long time, but we want to professionalize the field. So what are you all doing toward that end?
Well, yes, as you mentioned, the expectations are high for family child care providers, and our work has shown that they are highly regulated and they are being moved into being educators and wearing many other hats as well. They are not babysitters, and they are offering a professional service. And we've seen that we do need to incorporate also business education, financial education to assist with that process. We conducted a financial needs assessment and reported the outcome of that in a white paper called Unleashing the Economic Power of Family Child Care Providers. We based a curriculum, we created a curriculum based off of that assessment, which covers the usual small business topics, but specifically from a family child care business lens. That's offered as a course. It can be done through technical assistance, one-on-one. We also do facilitate the providers networking through our yearly conference. And we are encouraging them, as well as their communities, to see them as business owners and professional service providers. The benefits accrue not only to the family child care providers' families, but also to the community at large by ensuring that they have sustainable, viable, affordable, quality child care in the community. And many of these providers can also create employment opportunities, as well as the obvious facilitating parents going to work, all of which increases economic activity.
Thank you.
The next question is going to the Parent-Child Home Program. How does your model work with diverse populations?
So I guess there are a bunch of ways, but the main focus, I think, is in the training of the staff to intentionally seek out local practices and values of our families. I think there's also an emphasis on finding a cultural match between the home visiting staff and the families we're working with. And I think overall the ethos of the program is to approach all of the families from a strength-based perspective.
I have a question that's not on your list, but I'm sure you can answer it. I'm really interested in technology. Obviously, it's come about since the Parent-Child Home Program whole model was invented. How are you all integrating, say, FaceTime, texting, even the phone, to supplement or to enhance the wonderful home visits you provide?
So I'm going to answer your question in two pieces, because one piece that we have been focusing on and see as the most important role we can play with families is helping them figure out how to use technology with their children in appropriate ways. And so we have been doing a pilot which works with our families at the end of the 2 years of home visiting So as the child is turning 4, before they would enter a pre-K or a Head Start program, that focuses on working with the parents on how to use educational games, ebooks on a tablet to do interactive activities with their children. So again, continuing to focus on that parent-child interaction and modeling for parents how they can use technology and tool with their children. That's part of preparing their children for how they will be faced with technology when they walk into classrooms. The second part of that, though, is helping to educate the parents on technology. Many of the families that we work with, we find that the parents don't have email addresses, they don't have regular access to Wi-Fi, and the ability to get information regularly via the internet, and just preparing them to navigate the internet, particularly in many urban areas where things like pre-K registration and all the information about the school district is online, getting them connected to that. We also have found through some of our sites that texting is a useful way to reach some parents, although we need to be careful, as some of your previous questions have raised, about whether A, we're texting parents in a language that they read, and B, what their literacy skills are overall. And so many of the parents we work with are not only not literate in English, but may not have strong literacy skills in their native language. And so much of the information that we deliver to parents, we want to make sure we're delivering verbally in a way that they can access it.
It's a beautiful answer. Thank you.
Our next question is for ACE, a Community for Education in Texas. What is the research evidence base of your program?
Sure. So national reading research has clearly identified the most important foundational skills that set a child up for success in reading. And we have developed our own research-based curriculum that addresses explicitly these foundational skills that we know are most important at kinder, first, and second grade that set a child up for becoming a fluent, skilled reader. And we use data in our program to drive our instruction. We monitor the progress of children every week, and I think our tutors find that as they graph those results and they're tracking kids' progress, they're really able to see as things improve, or if they don't, then what should we do to get that child back on track. And as a former teacher and reading specialist myself, it's really important when I was working to develop this program that we match the support for our paraprofessional AmeriCorps tutors that they need to be successful. So our staff is with them. We do pre-service training, and then we do ongoing training every week on site as they visit the schools and review the progress of the children. And it's working. About 2/3 of our children close the gap completely every year, and 80% make measurable progress.
So I have two questions. One, are you working at Ortega, where I was a first grade teacher?
Yes, we are.
And what about Zavala, where my children went to school? Are you working in Zavala?
Yes, we are.
Okay, well, that's good. Those are two of my favorite Austin schools.
Yes.
And then,
we're in 26 schools in Austin and 32 total.
Wow, that's wonderful. How are you recruiting qualified bilingual tutors?
Yes. Well, we recruit 106 AmeriCorps members every year, so if you know anyone out there who's eager to do a term of service, send them to us. We recruit from across the country, and I have a fabulous bilingual recruiter, Christina Flores, and I'm going to let her tell you a little bit more about how we find our amazing bilingual tutors. We try to find half of our tutors who are proficient in Spanish.
Hi, everybody. So because 75% of the students that we serve in Austin ISD are Latino, we do recruit half of our tutors to be bilingual. And we actually do a lot of outreach to universities nationally in Spanish departments, and so and also study abroad programs. So for people who've studied Spanish or who are native Spanish speakers, want to serve their community, or people who have studied abroad in South America, learn Spanish and want to continue to practice their Spanish, become bilingual tutors. And we assess their bilingual proficiency level during the interview as well. And actually, Jose here is a bilingual tutor with us. He's going to talk a little bit about how he heard about ACE.
Yeah, so I heard about ACE through a friend who was serving with the program last year. And she just came up to me and was like, you'd be like a really great asset for this program. Like, you're a native speaker, and I think the beautiful thing about a program like ACE is that it brings non-native speakers and native speakers like myself together, and we are encouraged and supported with a great staff to empower a child to make success in the classroom. And once they make that success in literacy, that confidence just begins to carry over into all areas of their life. And you can see that presented in the data, but just in meeting with the child one-on-one and just seeing that success continue when you stop working with them, and hearing about it from other tutors from all over our campuses here in Austin.
Great, thank you. This next question is for Port Salerno Talks Early Language Initiative in Florida. Whose job is it to work with parents beginning at the birth of their children, and how early should early learning start?
The work of supporting parents is really multifaceted and community-based. When we first started our program, it was an outreach program from our elementary school here in Port Salerno, but we soon realized that there were others in the community who had an interest in supporting early language development, and so we started to reach out to hospitals, to pediatrician offices, to community agencies and organizations other than the school district in order to make it a countywide community effort. We know that with ESSA, the Every Student Succeeds Act, that there is going to be much more emphasis on early learning, and we're real excited about the opportunities that may come about with that and allow us to further engage the community agencies and organizations.
And really, when we think about how early should we start, it's never too early for early learning. What we know about language acquisition, brain science, and economics tells us that the earlier we begin collaborating with families, the better. We know that the children who've heard more words in their early years have larger vocabularies and go on to experience more success in school with stronger reading comprehension skills, increased cognitive function, and higher IQs. And it's really a child's home language environment that's setting the trajectory for future vocabulary development. Not only are children who are hearing fewer words entering school behind their peers, but due to their slower language processing speeds, they're following a lower trajectory in terms of adding vocabulary, and it's resulting in an ever-widening gap. So a lot of times we look at high school graduation rates as a measure of educational success, but what can we at times overlook is that high school graduation rates can be predicted off of third grade reading level, and third grade reading level can be predicted off a child's vocabulary by the age of 4, and that can be predicted off of the richness of the home language environment. So we focus a lot of our efforts on getting children to read on grade level, which is a noble and necessary undertaking, but if that's the only place we're allocating our time, our energy, and our funding, we'll never see the level of returns necessary to move the needle. So when we're working with parents to help them establish a rich home language environment and literacy skills, there's no such thing as too early. It comes down to the difference between closing the achievement gap and preventing it beginning at birth, and really it just makes a whole lot more sense to prevent it.
I have a quick follow-up, and I want a quick response is, what do you do if a family declines your services? Because sometimes the people that need it most might not know it.
Well, our program is completely voluntary, and so hopefully through the interaction in the community, because it is a small community here in Port Salerno, is we know that the program will grow. So we're trying to get the families in. All of the families have children in school with younger siblings, so we're making an impact with the family, and you know that there's many families in the area. You know, many families sometimes live in the same household, so we're hoping to be able to reach as many families as we can. And as we grow this in our community, it will reach out into other communities within our county.
Right. What we're finding is that there's quite a lot of word of mouth. Families are taking on the learning and sharing it independently.
Great, thank you.
Then this next question is for Vision to Learn. How do giving kids glasses benefit early learning?
Well, in addition to our work in K-12 schools, Vision to Learn provides vision screenings, exams, and glasses to pre-K children. We have found throughout our work in early education centers that about 1 in 10 students have a vision problem. Diagnosing and treating vision problems early helps keep students on track, developing pattern recognition, language, and motor skills. Additionally, if serious conditions like amblyopia and strabismus are not diagnosed and treated at a young age, they may lead to permanent impaired vision later in childhood. UCLA qualitative and quantitative research of our program model has shown that providing glasses to a child in need results in boosted math and reading GPAs, improved classroom behavior, and better participation. And my colleague will show you a real qualitative example of why it matters.
So it's important for children to actually be involved in the process of learning, and so once they get the glasses, behind us this wall is showing you some of the artwork that they've made. This is our mobile clinic.
Oh, nice.
And in this one in particular, this is a letter, and it says, "Thank you for coming to St. Lawrence. I will be able to read and see better with the free glasses. Things won't be blurry. Thank you." And that's from a child.
If a community wants to follow up and do what you're doing, where do they start?
So Vision to Learn is currently in 5 states: California, Delaware, Hawaii, Iowa, and most recently Maryland. And we are planning an aggressive expansion into new areas. They can contact us through our website, visiontolearn.org, and we will get in touch and let them know what the early or midterm time frame might be for coming out to their area. We also have different colleagues around the country that are starting to do this type of work, and so we're happy to make referrals if we know that there are colleagues in their area as well. We want every child in need to get glasses.
This is a call from Texas right now.
Sounds good.
So this next question is for Notre Dame. ACE Academy, how do you increase students' kindergarten readiness? And how have you seen that investing time with early learners has paid off?
Hola, buenas tardes. Hello, good afternoon. I'm the Early Childhood Director, Maria Otamendi. Well, we work with the children as a whole in a holistic way, implementing the Arizona Learning Standards with them. And also we do the early intervention if we observe the children that need to have a referral, for example, an IEP or speech. So we need to do a lot of observations with them through the whole school year. And also mental health referrals as well. We also create this new program called the Summer Bridge Program to focus on the school culture, social, emotional, other children and adults, and academics, so they get to know, be familiar with the kinder environment. As well, we have a professional learning community which goes from pre-K teachers to the 2nd grade teachers, and we have a discussion, vertical alignment of curriculum and standards, and set goals for students and instructional goals, and evaluate the students for work samples. So we have different discussions between teachers, and we suggest different strategies on how to support better the students. So that's the answer.
Thank you.
Fantastic.
So our last question is to LA Up in California. Given that 60% of your children in LA Up are Latino, what percentage are English as second language learners, and how do you address their needs?
So we know that 68% are Latino. Of those, 59% of them are English language learners. And we work with our providers, which are family-based as well as center-based, to ensure that, again, that the staff have the skills and we bring them together. So we don't differentiate that FCCs are not as good as centers because it's that teacher. It's about having the skills, the materials, and the time to plan instructional programs that meet the needs of the children. So let me turn it over to Shelley, and I know she's going to be but to talk a little bit about some of the teacher training institutes and how we work with providers to make sure that we're addressing the needs of all of our kids.
So I'm Shelley Roche. I'm the Senior Director of Provider Operations here at LAF, and I'm the coaching and support for the providers as well as the directors. And so over the years, we have developed and kind of refined what we call Teacher Institute. And through that, we bring providers together in groups of 50, and we offer a series of trainings. Usually it's about 3. And in fact, today we have a Directors Institute going on right now, so to build their skills, give them the resources and the confidence that they need to work with children and families, regardless of their language. We also have Russian, which is one of the languages that wasn't mentioned, but we've done a lot to ensure that providers have, like I said, the confidence, the resources to help families and providers do their best to get kids ready.
Thank you so much. I appreciate all of our bright spots today. Before we close, I first, not only do we thank you, but we want to make sure that you know that all this information is recorded. And so we're going to continue sending this off. We want you to send it off and distribute it to your colleagues, to the members in your community, so that we really talk about the importance of early learning. Now that we understand the local level and all the efforts around the nation, I'd love Libby Doggett to talk about the federal perspective.
Great. Well, thank you all. I'm so proud of all the bright spots, and particularly proud of the initiative and all you all have done to really highlight what's going on at the local level, because what's going on at the local level is what's most important. But we do want you to know that we're doing everything we can on the federal level to get more early learning funds, more learning programs, more ability for you to blend the funds and braid them together. As someone mentioned, the new Every Student Succeeds Act, or ESSA as some people call it, or ESSA, does have some new language that allows more ability for local school districts and state education agencies to address the early learning needs, not only with programs, but to support teachers, to support special populations, to align the services. So we will have less ability to do that on the federal level. We'll have a lot of the initiative is now going to revert to you at the local and the state level to really make a difference in early learning. But you have to look at the bill because it really does offer us some new opportunities. There are a couple of other things. I know you all know about the preschool development grants. We're really excited that 18 states are providing services in 230 communities to 33,000 children, and they're finishing their first year. So it's been a pretty exciting year. In the fall, 40,000 4-year-olds will go to preschool, paid for out of federal funding. And these are programs that have high quality standards and include kids with disabilities. They're full day. They have strong family engagement. Teachers have professional degrees and are paid a teacher's salary. There are accommodations and good curriculum and everything we really want for all of our children. And we're hoping that they set a standard in the state and in the community so that we can really bring the high quality programs to every child. Also, we're doing a lot around STEM. That's why I had questions around STEM, which you all know is science, technology, engineering, and math. We want to make sure people know that it begins early. And actually, for early learning, we do a lot of STEM activities. We play with sand and water, and we build things with blocks and Legos and Lincoln Logs and Tinker Toys, all kinds of things. And we're just not using a scientific approach with them or using some of the language. So we really want to increase the use of STEM in all areas in early learning, and just had a major initiative, our major symposium at the White House where we got a number of commitments, and we hope we will be doing some Google Hangouts with them. We also just last week released a new family engagement policy with HHS. I hope you'll read it. We have 2 other policies, one on inclusion, one on expulsion and suspension, and we want to make sure that these are getting in the hands of families and to practitioners. We know they can make a difference. They're not new policy, but they're written in a way that you can use them. And finally, just want to say we want to do everything we can to continue to support you on the local level, because that's where the rubber hits the road, and we know that you're making a huge difference with children all across our world. So thank you all so much.
Thank you. With just a few minutes left in today's Hangout, I'd like to thank my colleague, Libby Doggett. Thank you so much for joining us. Our outstanding bright spots in Hispanic education, hanging out throughout the nation, and really doing the work for children. To everyone watching via live stream, thank you as well. And to remind you that if you know of an organization that is doing great work to support the educational attainment of Hispanics from cradle to career, we'd love to hear about them. Please visit our website at ed.gov/Hispanic Initiative for further information on the work of our initiatives and for further information on all of our bright spots in Hispanic education. The 250 bright spots that we mentioned earlier on this Google Hangout are all listed on our website, so please feel free to visit our website. We look forward to hanging out with you again on June 15th, when we'll be joined by another group of bright spots who are focused on college access supporting DACA students. Thank you so much. I'd like to say goodbye to each one of our bright spots: ACE in Austin, the Parent-Child Home Program in New York, Port Salerno Talks Early Language Initiative in Florida. Thank you so much. Vision to Learn in California.
See you all soon.
Notre Dame ACE Academy.
Bye. Thank you.
Los Angeles Universal Preschool in California, and Committee for Hispanic Children and Families.
Bye.
Thank you all so much. It was a pleasure speaking to you today.